Zach.
Michael.
How's it going for the podcast for today? I mean, we're recording. Things are different today.
Things are different.
If you're on the pod, you don't know what that is yet. But if you're on YouTube, you probably already have a good idea that our green screen's gone.
Green screen's gone, and that's not the only thing.
Yeah. That's
probably a good idea for people to subscribe to us on YouTube.
That's
so
right.
They can get this exclusive content. They'll know what's going on.
I'm going to do these in order of importance.
Wow.
So probably the second biggest thing is we have a guest with us here, Jonathan White. Welcome back to the podcast.
He just waved. If you are watching on YouTube, if you didn't, you missed it.
Oh, so we can just kind of narrate the action as it goes.
That's good.
Yeah. And then probably third most important is that we don't. Even more important to have Jonathan. We don't have Lord of the Rings in our background,
which is to be fair, all I've ever wanted. It's why I came on the podcast in the first place. Is I wanted to be in Hobbiton or one of the other locations.
Yeah.
And every time I show up, they take the green screen away.
It is crazy.
If we could get the green screen maybe like 1 foot wider, we could probably do it with 3 people.
Wow.
But
Man,
unless I guess we could just sit really, really close to each other.
That's
close.
true. That'd be
the Hobbit house gets a little snug with 3 guys in there, huh?
Yeah.
Honestly, as much as Jonathan wishes he was there, I'm so glad I'm not. So I don't know. It's like it's one man's trash is another man's treasure, or something like that.
And then lastly, I'm wearing a blue shirt. Jill makes fun.
I've never seen this before.
I know. Jill makes fun because I want to buy a shirt. She's like, how many blue shirts do you have? I have a lot of blue shirts because blue is my normal color, but without the green screen here, we can.
Wow.
We're free to wear whatever color we want to.
I would like to point out that I've been free to wear whatever color I want since the first time I was on this podcast.
It's pretty amazing, but it does get texted about. Jonathan, in his wisdom, was like, "Is it okay? What color am I allowed to wear?" Because he knows that you wear the wrong color. Boom.
All right, so Jonathan, we just got done teaching a series at CBC, and the first 2, 4, 6 lessons in that series, well, it went parallel with your Old Testament Wisdom series, so same number of lessons, were about marriage. And then we tacked on this end piece that we thought was good for really everyone, pertinent to marriage and parenting, but talking about social media usage. And so we wanted to ask, I guess if you're on YouTube, you're kind of on some type of social media platform if you're watching.
That's right.
But we wanted to have you here, kind of give us an overview of that. So anything to say before we take it to the next level?
Ooh. Once again, we should have our guest say this. And before we get into it, we did this last time, but give us your credentials. Assistant principal, middle school at Northwood Academy. He is a Colson Fellow, and he is a master teacher. Did I nail it?
Those do belong to me. Those titles are mine.
And
any other type, Mister?
He does have his master's in some sort of writing.
In literature, yeah.
Literature.
Yeah. But that still makes me just a mister, not a doctor or anything like that. Yeah.
It's great. Well,
J. Carl White?
That is my signature.
I'm talking about social media. That's what some people might only know you by if they only see you on Facebook. Well, go ahead and just stare into the soul of the camera and tell it that we're going to take it to the next level.
Let's take it to the next level.
Woo!
From the heart of the Low Country in South Carolina.
It's the Take 2 podcast, where we take theology to the next level. So we are here with Jonathan, as we said, and I just want to say off the bat, really enjoyed the class. I felt like I considered some things in a different light, and that even led to action. Maybe we'll talk about some of that action when we get to it, where it fits into it.
Yeah, I will say this. We mentioned on another podcast, I'll say it really briefly. And maybe it's a teaser for a future podcast. I don't know when the other one's going to drop. But for a short time, I have got rid of my Facebook app, and it actually caused me to be a worse employee at work. Came back to bite me. I did not know what was going on in my employee's life, and I came off very uncaring. But I think that's a really one-off. It has to do with fires in Myrtle Beach, something that probably won't happen a lot, but
Yeah.
Anyway,
so you talked about media usage in general, and maybe phone usage in particular. And you've given this brief a number of times, or talked to middle school kids and parents. So is there something like, just give us a broad picture of maybe what you've seen since you started teaching, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, 14 years ago? 15 years ago, wow.
She was all around it.
How does that make you feel?
Me? You've been teaching for 15 years.
I've been in the real world for 15
that
years
is crazy.
at least.
Yeah, so the little known fact is that Jonathan I think you were in 9th grade right when we came to CBC.
That sounds about right.
2002 was your 9th grade year, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and Jill and I, you were in our youth group, and then we had a relationship post-youth group, were discipled and worked through the book of Romans and maybe Galatians, and so good times. So yeah, I guess that makes me old.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, but just not really get right at it. I just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So so I started teaching in 2010, and that was all high school. And it was one of those situations where, as I've been in the classroom over that following decade plus, there are definitely changes that have happened. And I think if you were to talk to people, not even just people in education, but if you were to talk to people that deal with adolescents in any capacity throughout their days, there's just a lot of anecdotal evidence that things have changed. There have been some differences in the way that adolescents interact with other people, the way that they are able to pay attention or not pay attention for longer periods of time, do some of that challenging mental investment when it's necessary, and all of that kind of anecdotal evidence has really actually gotten grounded in the last few years by a lot of actual hard data. So social scientists have just started to look at something that has shifted, and really the years in question are 2010 to 2015. That's kind of the time span where social scientists started noticing a major upswing in what they call major depressive episodes in adolescents and teenagers, and a host of other mental health related issues like a rise in anxiety and medication for anxiety, the prescriptions being handed out for that in adolescents, as well as emergency room reports and clinical reports of adolescents involved in self-harm. And so with the just kind of almost meteoric rise in those 5 or 6 years, it prompted a lot of looking, a lot of testing, a lot of research and data gathering. And I think maybe one of the best resources out there right now about it, it's gotten a lot of playtime in media and on bestseller book lists, but The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt is sort of a compendium of the research surrounding adolescence and mental health in this era, mostly for Gen Z.
And you were saying Jonathan Haidt is a pillar in the Christian church.
Yeah, I think he's a Dallas Theological Seminary grad. Is that right?
Is that just a cut at Dallas? No, Jonathan Haidt is open about his atheism. He mentions it in the book. And that was a caveat that I gave as we were talking through his book. And really, we spent a lot of time with his book. There were other things that came up in that class that I think were important, but we did spend a lot of time working through kind of the layout of his book and what led up to it and the things that he saw in the data. But the caveat was, he is an atheist. His perspective is, evolutionary psychology. And so everything that we see, whether in society or in the human psyche, his worldview insists that it is just the result of biological evolution. And that kind of makes you wonder, okay, well, can I read this book and get something out of it? And, and it can be that's a good concern, I think, to have for Christians reading with discernment. But interestingly, those kind of his adherence to that worldview, which we might call materialism, is not something that interrupts his gathering and reporting of data. And it's also interesting that in his book, he actually kind of open-handedly, looks at data and says communities of faith that are tight-knit communities of faith that have committed believers and subtext, you can read committed Christians, right? When there's a family that is committed to church attendance, Bible reading, Bible memorization, when they have some of these certain factors in play, Jonathan Haidt is quick to say these sorts of groups tend to see a much lower rate of they kind of buck the trend of what we see in the broader culture. And that's not always true in the Christian community, except when you adjust for making sure that when you're looking at data, you're looking at actual committed born again believers, right? So there's a statistic that says 50% of marriages end in divorce for both believers and non-believers. Well, if you actually look at those data sets and say, what does it take to be called a believer, a Christian in that data set? It's a pretty broad spectrum. If you narrow it down to what is the divorce rate among committed Christians that would call themselves born again, that have a commitment to marriage as a covenant and attend church regularly, man, all of a sudden the divorce rate drops dramatically. And so again, it's interesting coming from an evolutionary biological perspective, even in psychology. Jonathan Haidt is willing to go, like faith communities are doing something right when they're all in on their faith. So it's just an interesting detail.
I would just say that I'm right there with you because I've had conversations with atheists where the subject wasn't origin of life, and I was able to say, hey, you believe that we evolved over a million of years to this point. I believe we were designed to this point. Either way, we both believe that our bodies are adapted for this thing, either by design or through evolution. So we can agree to disagree on that right now because we're talking about this thing. And so, and I guess in this particular subject we're talking about today, we have not been necessarily designed or adapted to a lot of usage of this screen. And so that's really going to throw off our biology. So I think it's, there might be some minor differences of how what we may say what the solution is or some of the, but I think overall, like you said, the data gathering and the idea that this is really different than what we've done, even if you're a very young earther and you think 6,000 years, like, okay, this is 10 years at the end of 6,000 years. So this is a huge change for how humans have interacted with their environments.
Right. Yeah. So the recognition of the problem, that part is kind of unavoidable. The data is unavoidable. So for the last, I guess the last decade or so, from 2010 through the 20-teens, again, it was a lot of anecdotal evidence. It was a lot of teachers, in teachers' meetings saying, "Man, I can't get the kids to concentrate." It was, and so part of that is developmentally appropriate. Like there are limits to developmentally, there are limits to what children should be expected and required to do in an academic setting. But teachers across the board were having these conversations, and it's just, something has changed. Something's different. Something has changed. And now the data is here for it. So I went through in our Sunday school class the sort of the layout of Jonathan Haidt's book, and we can just kind of briefly breeze through that stuff.
I'll take the first one, and you can take the other ones, but don't look at it. Surge of suffering. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, because all the data has started to pour in. Longitudinal studies are now pouring in about, we've got a decade and more of collected data on adolescents and their screen time, their internet usage, their social media app usage, and so that data is, all the graphs are like they just kind of go up with whether it's major depressive episodes, anxiety, prescriptions, whether it is the incidence of self-harm or incidence of bullying and cyberbullying in schools. It's going up. So the surge of suffering was the thing that required attention. Like, let's look into these things.
Number 2, don't look at it. Well, I was going to say, I remember like...
Search of Suffering was the only one I remembered, so I wanted to take that one.
You just had to get that one first.
I remember helping out with the youth group at our church. It probably was like 2015 or something, to your point, Jonathan, where it's like, we did a study on the social media problem, like no hard data, but everyone's kind of like, man, it definitely can't be good. And I think most people probably know a lot of people with these kind of disorders. It's not only something that's going up, but not saying all of this is bad, but very openly talked about, like the way you talk to someone is, do you feel hurts? Or it's like a different even way to communicate. Again, not all of it's bad, but it's like, man, it's everywhere. You need to be very careful because if you say something wrong and it's triggering, and it's a complicated thing. I'm just gonna go off my memory, and I think it was something about a decline of play-based childhood. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so the next 2 sections of the book, Jonathan Haidt goes into detailing the decline of what he calls a play-based childhood and the rise of what he calls a phone-based childhood. And in that first section about play-based childhoods, he really starts to kind of talk about, from a developmental perspective, what do children need in order to thrive as they're growing through these really, really important ages. Kids grow really fast and then really slow for a little while. And in that kind of extended childhood that a lot of mammals don't have, there are some really important milestones for humans, and we would say, well, this is by design. This is not something that has been just developed over millions of years, but although millions of years could have been at play at some points, depending on your creationist theorizing.
Sure.
Whenever we talk about a play-based childhood, it's giving opportunities for kids to develop in ways that are important for them, where they're developing resilience, the ability to be independent, to make choices, to assess, risk and reward. And so play-based childhood is really, if you're older than maybe 30 or 32, it's probably kind of describes your childhood, where you kind of had the freedom after school. You just kind of go out and you're just out. You're out with your friends. You're riding bikes around the neighborhood, or depending on where you live, you're out doing chores. If you live in a rural area, maybe it's dirt bikes and 4-wheelers. Maybe it's chores out in taking care of animals or doing something with crops. But there was just a sort of lack of adult supervision. I mean, and again, we can talk about that in both positive and negative ways. But I just know that there's a lot of things that happen in that kind of play-based childhood, where there's a little bit more of that unstructured freedom for kids to develop significant aspects of both their personality and their character. And Jonathan Haidt says, well, that's just really diminished as we've gotten into this information culture, this internet saturated world. That kind of childhood has really gone away because there's always a stimulus, and it's easier, and parents feel that it is safer. With the proliferation of a 24-hour news cycle, and the ability for, what makes people watch the news, what makes people click on stories, it's when they're horrifying things. And so those stories tend to, in the newspaper industry, there's an old line, if it bleeds, it leads. And so saturating our minds with what were perceived to be the dangers of our culture, parents even back in the 90s started this development of sort of safetyism, and kind of bringing their kids maybe closer to home. And as the rise of internet culture in the late 90s, and video game systems, and then phones in the mid 2000s, all that stuff sort of allowed parents to put their kid at home and just put them in front of a screen and let that thing take care of them. Whereas they didn't have to worry about, are they going to be home before the streetlights turn on? And that has some ramifications that we're still kind of seeing. But that idea of safetyism, we felt like the world became too dangerous because we just saw news stories all the time about things that were dangerous. Parents that grew up in the 70s, there's all kinds of serial killer. If you ever watch serial killer documentaries, it seems like the 70s was the time
Right.
where all the serial killers lived.
Yeah, Unsolved Mysteries, Dateline, all those things
Yep.
have helped us go, oh, and we look at the worst possible scenario and we go, I don't want that to happen to my child. And I think, well, for me, and I think both y'all grew up in Memphis, you grew up in Charleston, so larger towns. I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, so I could walk to school because I lived 2 blocks away from school. During the summer, I could ride my bike like 4 or 5 blocks away to the post office, get mail. Like, my parents were at work. Like, they don't know where I'm at. I could just decide, you know what? I'm going to go get the mail today and stuff. And I was looking, you were teaching, I was like, I don't allow my kids that level of freedom. How can I, I start thinking, how can I incorporate some of that level of freedom? Because even when some of our girls are like, can we run around the neighborhood? I'm like, have your phone with you, stay in this part of the neighborhood, and they're probably fairly safe. But, you hear horror stories of missing and going sex trafficking and stuff like that. And you're like, what's the balance?
And the irony is that statistics wise, our kids are actually safer today in public spaces than they've really ever been. And yet it's the time when we're most controlling about where they are. And I'm with you, like my neighborhood doesn't have like amenities. So there's not like a pool or a clubhouse or that kind of stuff. And it's not like in a top area of town. And so, like I'm not in a place where I feel comfortable just letting my kids kind of wander the neighborhood like I did at their age growing up. But that, it's interesting that we did this sort of inverted ratio where we started pulling them in from the physical world and overprotecting in the physical space and absolutely underprotecting in the digital space. And I think the beginnings of it were just a lot of parents just didn't know what was going on. Parents that grew up totally analog. The digital revolution was like I don't even know what's going on. Like my kids are just over there playing with some fancy game, and that's fine. It's whatever. But
do you think parents of our generation, because the internet was hitting when I was in maybe 9th grade, of course y'all grew up with the internet. Do you think that we're a little bit more savvy to the dangers of the internet? Maybe that's changed some of this because we saw it younger, whereas parents of maybe your parents didn't have that, so that you were maybe let loose. I don't know. Maybe a generational thing.
I think this generation definitely has a better handle on what it is, because I had sort of a half and half. So the millennials, it was like a good chunk of my childhood and formative years were pretty much analog. Now we had a TV, there was cable once in a while, but and we got like a Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 9 years old, so we could play Duck Hunt or something like that. But I think parents of my age in general are a little bit more savvy about what the negative ramifications are, but I'll actually tell you where I think the major hope is. I think it's the generation after me, because there's some recent reports out from the Colson Center, little plug for those Colson fellows out there, that Gen Z is actually starting to there's some preliminary data that says Gen Z is starting to sour on some social media, and I think a lot of it has to do with, like you said, how free they are to talk about mental health issues, and then sort of the overwhelming realization of where those mental health issues are a lot of times stemming from, and that's again major deal. But I think this generation, generation of parents my age has an idea, but I really think the cultural tide, Gen Z has the opportunity to turn the cultural tide in a way that millennials, we may have lost that by just a couple of years.
Good. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was curious to, I was going to make a comment, this will probably come later, but it's not the same as social media, but a lot of these people, a lot of people a little bit older than I do, sit in front of Fox News or CNN all day, and it feeds them in a different way. They're not swiping, but it's maybe a lesser screen that's doing that. And then I was gonna say
the dawn of the 24-hour news,
which it's all the time. And because we do have our phones, there is that girl that went to the mailbox, got abducted, and that's on. We've got some video of it where we didn't even have video before, so that's more real. My question for you guys: when did you all get cell phones? Just thinking about our ages and where we were. I know I was on my 13th birthday. I was allowed to get a cell phone, but the coolest thing our cell phones did was like go through ringtones. Like we would spend a lot of time like, with my ringtone, we could play Snake.
Right.
Maybe there was like if you had like a BlackBerry, you could do the little brick breaker thing. But I'm just curious where like you guys were introduced to some of this technology.
Yeah.
I got my first cell phone after I graduated high school, or maybe at the very end of high school, and it was merely for safety, traveling back and forth. And it was one of those things like you have so many minutes. And don't even dare think about texting.
It's like a quarter.
It was crazy expensive. And if someone texted you, you still had to pay for it. It's like, don't text me.
Don't text me, man.
And so then,
and don't send a text that's like, okay. Oh, man, what a waste of a word.
Right. And so then probably the first smart device I got was an iPod Touch, which was like an iPhone but not a phone, because I still had I had a BlackBerry for my work, and I had an iPod Touch just for like a digital
I'll say
digital assistant.
7th, 8th grade, not a phone, but Palm Pilots were like a thing for a little bit of my school. Like we all got them as like kids. Anyway.
Whip out the stylus.
Yeah. And it didn't really work that well. Like the stylus didn't write. Like it was really difficult to work with. I think I got a flip phone when I was 16 because I was driving to school and driving a friend of mine to school. And I think that was the time when my parents were... Oh, and my brother... It must have been when my brother went to college because then he wasn't the driver anymore. I was the driver for me and my friends. And so then that was... So I was probably 16 when that happened, 16 or 17. And it was a flip phone. It was T9 texting, and so trying to explain that to middle schoolers today, like what it was like to have to run through that system texting.
Well, there was the one where you had to push them over and over again, and it would go like A, B, C, and then there was the one where it was predictive, so you could just hit the letter, and it would kind of give you some options.
That was a big step up in technology.
Yeah.
Cool. And even I remember as like. Probably around that age, like 13, 12, like you're on the internet, you got mail, AOL. It's like even some of that like dial-up stuff. While it's dialing up, I could do some play-based interaction. I got some time to kill. It's going to be 3 minutes before I can get on my email and instant messenger.
So, Jonathan, you talked about the real-life play. So there's a cycle kind of at home base. I've learned from my previous adventure. I go out, I risk some, I get scared some. I come back, I get comforted, and then I do that cycle over again.
Yes.
And then for digital, there's kind of a different cycle, this dopamine pathway. Do you want to talk about how that differs between the two of those?
Yeah, for sure. And there was a good example that I had in my notes to share on Sunday, and I told Kenya afterwards, I was like, I didn't look at my notes enough. I had things I wanted to say, and I just didn't get to say them.
I've been there.
So,
been there, done that.
So that attachment system that you're talking about where kids reach out from a secure base, they do something a little bit risky, and then they kind of see the reward or lack of reward, and they get a little bit anxious if they're going too far, and then they run back to that secure base to get kind of reaffirmed and feel good about what they did. The example that I have is our daughter Everly, who is 5. We have these plastic knives that we bought that are like designed for kids to be able to use to like cut their own fruit and stuff. And they're designed not to really be able to cut you very easily. Like you really kind of have to work at it if you're going to cut your hand with it.
If you play spoons with plastic knives, they will cut you.
Just a PSA for everyone out there. Not that anyone's tried it before, but Michael's hands, I can see the scars.
I feel like there may be a story that needs to be revisited in that at some point. Playing spoons with knives. It seems all right. We'll leave it there for now. So I've shown her maybe twice. We get it's a little serrated kind of silicone or plastic knife, and it's serrated, so you have to kind of push it forward to make it cut through whatever you're trying to cut. And I've shown her where to put your fingers, and then go ahead and slice down and make sure it's on a flat surface. And I think probably I've done it twice with her, holding her hand and holding her fingers and showing her how it goes. Well, the other day, I literally think I was sitting staring at this computer working on this presentation for one of the Sundays. And she came up to me and she was like on the verge of tears. Like you could see some tears in her eyes, like a little bit of watery. And she was holding up her hand and there was like a little red mark on one of her fingers. And I said, what happened? And she explained that she wanted strawberries, and so she got strawberries out of the fridge, which that's good. I told her she could do that. But then without me knowing, she went and got that little plastic knife that we use, and she had tried it on her own. And I was really proud of her that she went and she realized, I want this strawberry cut, because she doesn't want the green stuff on the top of it. And so she decided she wanted that strawberry cut. She went and got the knife, never said anything to me about it, and then tries it herself. But when she got to the point of fear, it slipped out of the way. The knife hit her finger. Now, it wasn't like, it was a tiny little scratch. It wasn't even something I was going to put a Band-Aid on. It was just a little impression. But she walked up to me, and that was that. She was returning to a secure base. And then what did I do? We walked over and looked at the situation and helped her understand how to kind of position things a little bit better. I showed her again, but then I didn't put my hands on it whenever she was going to actually do it. And so that cycle is so healthy, like to encourage independence, to affirm, what they've done. And then when they get a little bit anxious or fearful because they may have gone too far, they're running back to that secure base. That's a beautiful structure. But in the social media world, there's a whole different structure that doesn't really require a return to safe base. There's a cycle that looks a lot like an addiction cycle. And so it starts with some kind of trigger, something, and usually on a social media app, it's those push notifications. They pop up and tell you something has happened and you need to know about it. And so after that, you perform an action. So you tap on it, or if you're at a computer, you click on something. And the social media companies that are really smart have learned to be like casinos, where they give kind of variable rewards. It's not every time you go to the app are you going to get something that you really like. Sometimes it's going to be something really good, like you're going to see somebody commented on your photo or somebody liked something. But sometimes it just pops up with a push notification to say, hey, we thought you might want to see this. And you're like, I don't care anything about that. But they're just trying to get you into the app over and over and over again, sometimes with a reward, knowing that if 1 out of every 8, 9, or 10 times you get into that app, something triggers a dopamine release, the anticipation of the next dopamine release is even greater, and it just gets you into this cycle. So from the trigger to the action to that variable reward, to some investment in the app where you're putting part of yourself in the app. I mentioned MySpace because that was where we put all of ourselves in middle school. Our whole life was going to be displayed on that page. The colors were important. The music playing in the background was important. Your top 8 friends was really important. And if you switched it out, people were going to notice and they were going to say something like you were going to cause some drama. So all of that stuff, we invested ourselves into that. And that meant that for the future, now that I'm invested in this social media situation, I don't always need an external trigger to make me want to go to the app. Sometimes I just have a thought. Oh, I posted something a while ago. I wonder if anybody's seen it. And so all of a sudden, this cycle it's a cycle of addiction because of the variable reward and because of the dopamine that comes from those variable rewards. It is an addictive cycle, and social media companies know this. And we know from internal documents that whistleblowers have shared or that have been shared through Freedom of Information Act or that kind of thing. We know that social media developers are keenly aware of the psychology of addiction and the psychology of adolescence. And there's just a huge incentive for social media companies to get a massive consumer base that will always be a consumer base for them because they get to sell ad space that way, right? That determines their numbers for their cash flow. And they're good at this. Like the social media apps. I heard someone say early on in the sort of social media revolution, if the product is free, you are the product.
Right. Yeah. Right? There's a whole Netflix special. I think it was on Netflix.
Yeah, they have like the social, whatever it's called, but they do a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's how they like curate your doom scrolling feed and stuff, and how they know like how fast and how long exactly what you want to see.
They have all the numbers, and like from what I understand, it's like people that engineer this stuff is like my kid's not allowed on this because I know how addictive it is.
Right.
And going to that like real life playing versus the digital, even when things go bad in real life and you are anxious and nervous, it's just a different feeling than when you're scrolling and like it just zaps the life out. You like know it's not good. Like even when you mess up in real life, you're like, oh, this was not good, but it's like a totally different feeling in my mind.
Well, in real life, you can do something about it.
That's right.
Right. So like if Everly, when she slipped with the knife, the strawberry popped out of the way and she hit her finger with that little part of that knife, she could do something about it because that's a real world scenario and she can run back to a secure base. If something makes me feel anxious or fearful or awful online, there's not really a recourse. Like there's not a lot I can do. I mean, I can fire off in the comment section, but you're right. There's a
especially
sort of,
if you're an adolescent, maybe even less well prepared to do something about it. Maybe you don't say anything. Maybe that haunts your
it
thoughts.
just builds up. Yeah, it just builds up. Absolutely. Yep.
All right, so I'm guessing that many of our listeners really relate to what you're talking through because maybe they have had their own experience, like complaining on Facebook about getting 15,000 alerts about it freezing, and then going and see, 6 people laughed at that. I guess I said something pretty funny. Not that just happened for me. So we probably really relate to that, and then hopefully you're going, man, if I'm in this trap, how much more so than maybe my kids?
Yep.
So maybe you could speak as we're drawing. We're kind of this. Maybe we should have scheduled 2, but maybe you can speak quickly to the you say that word.
Evaluative.
Process for what's good in our life, and then maybe a game plan overall for parents who are they got young kids. Maybe they've already unleashed Pandora's box. Is there a strategy for getting Pandora in? Those types of things.
Yes, we don't have to follow the Greek myth on this one.
Yeah.
So the evaluative framework I think that Christians should generally use. It's interesting. We've been talking about Romans, and a lot of what I think about Christians evaluating their interactions and their participation in things comes from Romans 13 and 14 and then 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. I think these are 2 really, really strong passages for it because they're centered on, for the most part, they're centered on love. And that's a major defining characteristic. So I think in terms of kind of 4 laws that I want to I want to kind of let this be my rubric if I'm considering an involvement. And the first one is what John Piper calls the lowest question that you should ask. Still an important one, but it's the question of, is it a sin? Right? So we have clear commands in Scripture of things that fall into the category of sin. Exodus 20 begins that process, but then Paul gives us numerous different lists of things that are sinful. And so we want to run things in our life through that filter first. Is it a sin? Because that's a clear and obvious no, right? If something falls in that category, I have to step away from it. I have to remove myself. But if it's not a sin, then you kind of have these further tiers of questions. And so I call the next one the law of honor, and it's can I honor God in it? Which is a good question. But then it's, do I honor God in it? We look at 1 Corinthians 10:31 for that one.
And I'll say this is where I took action. Because I have some like stupid games on my phone, like little arcade games that are ad-based revenue. And I'm like, okay, could I maybe conceivably, but do I? I don't know. Maybe I'm like, what is the real benefit?
Yes.
So those, I just deleted them.
Yeah.
Just got rid of them.
That's strong.
Clash. Clans,
really
gone.
Okay, that's been on
Brawl
the
Stars, gone. Some other stuff just gone. It's like, just so I just still have chess.
Yeah,
there's a mahjong game I still have on because Phoebe likes to help match tiles, so I feel like that is a way.
Yes,
but I was so I evaluated like what is God honoring and what am I God honoring and what is just really a resource suck on my life. Get rid of it.
Yeah, and that's a really. I mean, And I have to say it every time I talk about these things, like I like to put this evaluative framework out there, but my life doesn't perfectly follow this thing. Like I have to look at, I love video games. I really enjoy playing video games. And I have to kind of I have had to take a step back in certain areas of life and areas of games, especially, to go, can I honor God in it? Do I honor God in it? Like that's a really hard question to have to be confronted with and go, that hurts sometimes. Like there's a cut there. The next one is the law of love, and it's, can I show love in it? Can I show love in this activity or this involvement, and will it cause a brother to stumble? And that was, I'm sure you guys have taken that up, and we'll be releasing that.
Did we cover that in Romans?
And that's just the law of love. Like, is this something that I can be involved in and not cause somebody else through my desire to please myself, even in a maybe a good thing or an okay thing? Is it going to cause somebody else to stumble? And then the last one is the law of expediency, and that is the question of, does it help me run? Is this something that? And that's John Piper has a great video, great sermon on this from Hebrews. Does it help me run? Laying aside these sins, but also everything that hinders us from being,
encumbrances.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. And man, when you run life through those 4 filters, you're like, I have to really be careful.
If you could expand this outside of social media, there's a lot of things you can run this through.
Yeah.
All right, game plan for parents. I think if you got young parents, maybe the easiest thing is just delay screen time.
Yes.
Limit screen time. Limit screen time. And delay when you give them autonomous screen time, like a phone or a tablet.
Well, and social media in particular, like that is the key. So smartphones themselves are not designed in the same way as social media apps. A smartphone is like a Swiss Army knife, right? It's not designed to be addictive. It is a tool, and it's a great tool. But the social media apps...
Star Trek tricorder.
The tricorder?
Yeah, it's like
does yours make those noises?
I bet you could. I bet there's an app for it.
Yep, probably. But yeah, so I would say yes, managing screen time and then delaying the time before kids get social media and really having the conversation with your teens. Why do you want it? Like, why do you want the social media? What do you think you're going to get out of it? How are we going to use it as a family? And I think one of the major things is having a family technology philosophy and a family plan. Like, we've got to have a conversation in our families where we go, what are these things for, and how are we going to use them, and what effect is that going to have on us? And having those conversations, especially when the kids get to have input. Parents make the decisions, but when kids are at the table, especially as they're getting older, preteens and teenagers, they need to feel a sense of ownership in some decisions that are being made. Now, sometimes another idea is that sometimes you just have to tell them, I know more than you and I love you, and so I'm going to make the right decision in this situation, whether or not you understand it, because I know more than you and I love you. But as often as possible, when we can give preteens and teens ownership, and really, I mean, it probably goes even further down into adolescence, when we can give them ownership in some of the family decisions, at least let them have their voice heard. Like, what is your thought on this? How are your friends using this? What are you noticing? That gives them some buy-in. And so it's not too late, whether you're just raising kids now that it's going to be years before they get into cell phones, or whether you have teenagers that have already kind of dived into this situation. It is never too late to step back and have the conversation. Is this good for us? What are we seeing here?
And I think it's fair to say as well that not all social media is the same. Karis, we've allowed her to have Be Real and Goodreads. Those are 2 social media platforms. I don't think they have, surely they have some of the addictive cycle built in because they want people, but I don't think, from my understanding of it, it's not quite as strong as like an Instagram or a Facebook. And then there's some social things that I feel like from the ground up are designed poorly. I don't even know the one that's like makes messages disappear that we just don't
Snapchat's one of those.
Like, we just don't, that's just not ever going to be allowed at the Mott House.
That's right. Yeah, with I haven't ever had a hard time just exiting Goodreads. You know what I mean? It's cool. It's great to see updates from my favorite authors, but so family technology philosophy, like talking about it as a family, having a plan for how and where, and I would even say where. Like, so in my family, I shared that my kids are 10, 8, and 5. And we don't really do screens during the week. We do have some screen time on weekends. And again, that's a feature of just our family schedule and how things work for us. But my kids know that they're not allowed to have a tablet in a room by themselves, right? So they're not allowed in bedrooms. Even at the ages of 10, 8, and 5, they are aware that these are common area devices. And so we don't go off by ourselves with these devices. So just having those sort of standards in the household is really helpful and helps to move them in the right direction of thinking, how should I be using this thing? There's also that put off, put on. So if you are in a situation where you already have teens or preteens and they have already kind of been in social media and now you're going, we got to pull this thing back, be prepared to provide some alternatives. Because there's going to be a gap there. It's not going to be a fun conversation. Nobody's going to enjoy each other's company for a little while.
Especially, I've heard 21 days is like key to reset your dopamine cycle. So you may have to really be present for those first 3 weeks while you're retraining your kids' minds and maybe even your mind to do some alternate things.
It's going to be some family board game time. It's going to be walks around the neighborhood. Like if you really want to do this, you're going to find ways to fill the space that was taken up by just that kind of social media scrolling. But if you're going to take something away, you've got to put something in that spot. And boredom can be one of those things. Boredom is good for kids. It is one of the times that our brains fire most uniquely and well, and build important connections when we're bored and have to kind of figure out what to do. So those would be some things. Also modeling behaviors, making sure that we are showing our kids what it looks like to live.
Get off your phone.
That's what I was going to say, because I think, what are some practical ways? I mean, I guess there's easy ways, just don't get on it, but it's different than something. I feel like my solution is just don't get on social media very much, or like take the app off. If I have to get on, I'll go through the browser, like just make it like a little bit harder. But part of me is like, maybe that's a bad way to look at it, where 10 years ago, you could say, hey, I'm fighting pornography. I'm getting rid of my computer. Can't really do that today because it's so ubiquitous. So like, how are you going to actually have a strategy? And filters and things are good, but what are you doing outside of that to help point you in the right direction? And, I don't know. But these are things I've been thinking about because, to me, it's easy to be like, hey, I just don't have any of these. But I don't know if it's almost like thinking of Romans 14. It's like, maybe I'm the weaker brother here, and I think drinking alcohol is a sin, so I'm just totally cutting off.
Right.
And I don't know.
So there can be a danger to doing the sort of monastery move where you just pull way back from something, because the reality is our kids are going to be without us in this culture at some point.
So we got to do some heart training.
Yes, and I think a lot of it comes down to that. And so there's family devotions, there's time around the dinner table. That's precious time. And we don't get that much of it. Like, we look at how long we have with these kids. I'm looking at pictures of your kids now. And Michael's got one that is in college and one getting ready to go, right?
Wow.
Yep. And one in kindergarten. So I'm about to go to start kindergarten.
The never ending.
That's right.
So we just recognize the time is limited, and so the job of the parent is to do that heart training, so that when we kind of release them, they've had exposure to things that they need to have exposure to. We've worked in their hearts. I say we've worked in their hearts. We don't actually get to do the work, right? We are praying for them and then doing our job, and the Holy Spirit is going to enter into that situation and do the work of molding hearts and changing affections and bringing them into the mind of Christ. But we have the biggest role to play aside from the Holy Spirit. The parents are the ones who have that biggest role to play, and we can't sleep on that.
It'd be interesting too. I've been thinking about, going through things like Facebook and this kind of thing, and just be like, who do I follow? Like, what is it putting in front of my face? What am I idolizing just by what I pick to idolize? Because there's probably certain things I can just like take off, because these people are just always pointing to certain things. You know what I mean? I don't know. Think just like, it's one of those things where I think Facebook just makes you, or any social media just makes you think about, put your focus on yourself so much and what other people think. And it's like, maybe a little bit of that's okay, but I don't know. I'm always trying to grapple with, how much is good to do
Right.
versus like, man, maybe I just need to not focus on myself so much.
Yeah.
Well, we want to keep grappling. I mean, that's the move, is to keep grappling.
So what I'm going to do is, you've taught 2 classes. Those are on Sermon Audio. I'm going to link them in the description. This Sunday, so this podcast will hit before this happens. We're going to have a panel discussion. And so I will, if I can remember, I'll go back and add that later to this.
Great.
So maybe you can check back in and find that there as well. Any like big major things we didn't cover, or anything that you want to add?
There's just, there are resources out there for parents that are interested in this topic and want to move.
You had a list of resources, and maybe I could get a copy of those and link those in the description as well. That would be good.
sure.
I have a quick question. I don't know in your research or this guy's book, and I know it's all different, probably based on your feed and your tendencies and these kind of things, but was there a correlation between, man, you spend more than 5 hours a week, it's bad news, or that's where you see a huge uptick, or it doesn't really matter?
One of the stats that sticks out in my mind, just as a mind blower, is that 3+ hours of social media a day for adolescents doubles the risk of mental illness. So, major depressive episodes, anxiety, suicidal ideation, these things, the risk of those is doubled for 3+ hours a day. And your average adolescent, the statistics vary, but it's 5+ hours a day for your preteens and tweens, and up to maybe 7 to 8 hours a day for teenagers. But the data also shows that teenagers that are given that like 7 to 8 hours a day, when the question is asked a different way, they go, I'm basically just continuously online. Like I'm continuously online as whenever I can be, I am. And so that number is alarming.
Wow.
But there are resources. Like I said, access.org, the Colson Center has great videos. The Anxious Generation is a good book if you just want to make sure you read with discernment, knowing the ideas of the author. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
All right. Well, Jonathan, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
thank you for doing all this research.
Happy to do it
I know
again.
this is like people ask me sometimes to teach something like, how long did you study for? Like, it's like my whole life. It's like, so I'm sure that some of this stuff you've been kind of, it's not just like a single thing, that it's like you delve into it, you study it, because that's kind of what you're about, leading and helping shape kids' lives. So I appreciate that.
And next time, how about that green screen?
Oh yeah, we'll figure something out, and we'll put some, if you want it to be
Weather top.
bag end. Oh, weather top. Okay, we'll do weather top. All right, so I think our guest has to
close it out as well. Do you remember the words?
I feel like...
Just say what you think it is. That's even better.
Oh, that would be good. From now on, the guest just end it how you think it should go. All right. That's our take.
Nice.
Nailed it. Thanks for listening to Take 2. Find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube for those who want to watch our videocast.